Hello and good time zone, everybody. Welcome to Horde of Tales and to another round of Creator Talks. My name is Markus, also known as the Chindividual, and on today's Creator Talk, I have the honor of being joined by Yvris of Button King Games, author of Drama Llamas, and also connoisseur of llama-related puns. But I will hand it over to her to tell us more a little bit about yourself. Yvris, hello and welcome.
Hi. Yeah. Hello. Thanks for having me. I am Yvris Burke. I am a game dev and occasional streamer based in Manchester in the UK. And yeah, I've written several games, most notably a solo game about being a baby bumblebee called Bumbling, and most recently and notably Drama Llamas, as you mentioned. So yeah, I'm a relatively new creator, relatively new to tabletop, but yeah, very enthusiastic and kind of obsessed. So yeah, that's me really.
Very cool to have you here. Yvris, you mentioned that you say you're relatively new when it comes
Mhm.
to creating games, but I assume that you didn't just one day decide to write a tabletop RPG. I'm assuming that you've been in the hobby for a while. Could you tell us how you got into tabletop RPGs? What got you into this hobby of dice and drama?
So yeah, I mean, I am shockingly not as experienced with even playing games. I started out with like Warcraft was my first introduction to the
Oh,
D&D type world. Like I remember
right.
playing Warcraft when I was in my early 20s and people being like it's basically just D&D but it's automated, and I was like what's D&D? And then started looking that up and got to play a couple of times, made a couple of characters who died pretty much immediately, playing with friends who didn't. They were learning how to DM and I was learning how to be a player, and we were all very confused and didn't really know what was going on, as can happen when you don't have like at least one experienced person in the group to be like this is how this is supposed to work. So there was that. I had that little phase, and then didn't play for a long time, and then actually it was through my previous job, that I worked for a company that was remote and people were all over the world and used to do these meetups once a year in person for a week. And there would be a lot of hanging out together, socializing together, arranging fun activities. And one of my co-workers there was a dungeon master and arranged to run a short D&D campaign while we were at this meetup. And I got to play again, and this time really clicked with it and understood what I was supposed to be doing because we had those experienced people who were playing. And yeah, got really into it. Went home and was like, I think I want to try and be a dungeon master. And then because I am such an over preparer, decided I had to read the entire player's handbook of 5e before I could even think about running a game, which I created this barrier that I didn't really need to playing. And it took me a long time to do that. And then I started running my first proper campaign actually a month before the first COVID lockdown in the UK. So I had played a few times over the years and then started as a dungeon master in February 2020. Had like one in-person session and then went online like immediately. And then, as I think a lot of people, new to the hobby or coming to the hobby during those lockdowns, I just sank into it so intensely. Like, just read everything I could find, read articles, went on the YouTubes, all these like advice on how to be a good dungeon master, started watching Critical Role, all of that stuff, just an intensive like absorption of everything I could find out on this subject. So that's how I got into tabletop over several years of like dipping a toe and then just plunging. Um, and yeah, in terms of like making games, I started maybe 6 months after I started running games, but very that's just very me. I get obsessed with things and then I have to do everything, and then I just like making things. Like I'm
Be-
always making things. So
because from what you described, like already, if you describe your pipeline of getting into tabletop RPGs, consuming everything you can find about it, really going deep into it, and then also making that jump to creating a game. I mean, that
Yeah.
is like to me, it sounds like it's all happened in a relatively short time frame. That you
Yeah.
discovered the hobby. I can also mention what you mentioned yourself, that especially with the start of COVID and the lockdowns, people were looking for hobbies as well to spend
Yeah.
together, even if they couldn't be
Yeah,
physically
and what
together.
better than just imagining being somebody somewhere else, someone else somewhere else, you know? It's just
Exactly.
real escapism, but also community, like all the things that we needed and were missing at that time. I think the surge of these games during that time is just they're the perfect thing for that time. And, you know, not that I think now that you know some people are easing off and some people are staying locked down, all of that stuff,
Mhm.
you know, even if we get to a truly post-COVID world, I think, you know, I think a lot of us will stick with tabletop. I think it's just a really fortunate opportunity for us to discover these things that, you know, uh, if nothing else, the lockdown gave us some time and space to discover new things maybe that we wouldn't otherwise have tried.
That's as I think that is very much it. You did have the time and space to find out these things and take the time
Hmm.
to discover them. And for you, in a fairly short time frame, you said you read the player's handbook from front to end, which I will admit, if any of my Dungeons and Dragons players are watching, I've been running D&D for years. I have never fully read the entire player's handbook. Um,
Yeah.
but you devoured all of that, started running your game, start of the pandemic, and taking the game online. And then you also, at a certain point, decided you want to design a game of your own.
Hmm.
As you just mentioned as well, you said that you like to create your own things. What was it that what was there any specific trigger or inspiration for you to start creating your own game?
I think, yeah, that's hard to say. I think what really it is that when you start running games, you do start creating, really.
Mm,
Even if you aren't publishing anything or making it publicly available, you do start tinkering and making things for yourself, usually. You know, I started out running, when I started running my first campaign, I started running Dragon of Icefire Peak, the
yeah,
beginners like module for D&D, you know, the obvious place to start. But I actually found I did not take to running published material that well. Like I still run a weekly D&D game, but I run entirely, you know, a homebrew world now because I just find it, for me, a lot easier to make things up than I find it to remember a mass of material that somebody else has written. And to, you know, especially when you're new, I think you don't realize that you can just take what you like from something and leave the rest. You feel like you have to be absolutely correct of what's on the page. And it was just a lot of overhead and stress. And then I would start revising the material and making my own notes and making up my own stuff. And of course, things go off the rails and you start improvising. And I feel like it's a natural progression as you start having to make things up on the fly anyway, to start being
right.
like, well, I can just do my own thing. And maybe if they, maybe it would be cool if they went to a place like this and you start homebrewing. And then I guess what made me actually write a first game was starting to engage with online communities, particularly the, you know, the indie community on Twitter. You know, I came onto Twitter and I started getting the full sort of download of all of the discourse around, you know, 5e and Wizards of the Coast, and then, you know, them versus indie and that kind
Right.
of, you know, split. And I, you know, as soon as I became aware of that, was like, yeah, well, that does make sense. Giant companies not going to always behave well. I'm a very anti-capitalist leftist person in my leanings. So I was like, yeah, no, let's see what this indie DIY community is about. Like that's, for me, I'm also into kind of like obscure music scenes. So the whole indie DIY concept was already very much in my mind as, you know, that's the way to go. Small creators just with the community around them, doing their own thing, doing the really interesting outsider thing. That's something I was
Yeah.
already familiar with and into from music. So it felt natural to get into that with tabletop. And then I started being aware of like jams on itch.io
Yeah.
and, joined a couple of them. And then I think the second jam I joined was called the Cozy Tabletop Jam, where you had to make a cozy game that was going to like be fun to play and lighthearted. And that really appealed to me as a real, and still does, that concept of like cozy sort of games that aren't about darkness and combat. I mean,
Right.
I still play D&D, as I say, but I think it's nice to have other ways to use this tool. And that's when I wrote Bumbling, and it did pretty well. So yeah, that kind of spurred me on, encouraged me to keep going. Got good response, reviews from people. It's still the most bought thing that I've written. Like, it's still the most popular thing.
Would you
So
say there's, you mentioned these jams, game jams, and I think there's a lot of jams that go on itch as well. Would you, if someone were to start being interested in designing their own game,
mhm.
would you suggest to them to join one
Oh,
of these
100%.
jams? Yeah.
100%. Yeah, because it's the expectation with a jam is that you've turned something around in a relatively short amount of time. That
Right.
reduces the pressure, because there can be so much pressure with making your own games, because we say indie, but there's such a broad spectrum of indie now, and some indie products are so like incredibly high quality, high production kind of things, and it just doesn't feel very accessible to a truly like bedroom
Mm,
first time creator. Whereas a
right.
jam, it's you've created this in a couple of weeks, maybe a month, probably in like a few hours before the end of the jam. You probably are using art that you drew yourself, laying it out as best you can with whatever tools you have available to you. And when the jam ends, there are people who, bless them, and you should be one of these people if you join a jam, go around and look at the other things that were entered into the same jam they just entered, pay attention to it, review it, comment on it. There's community around a good jam that helps you grow and figure out what you did well in this case.
Right.
So yeah, you should join jams if you want to make games, and you should be a person who, when the jam ends, goes and checks out other people's stuff and leaves reviews and comments, because that's how I got started. And without that early encouragement, I don't know whether I would have carried on. I think I would have, because there is a joy in creating in its own right. But yeah.
And there's also a joy in creating something alongside other creators. And I think that's
Yeah.
also an appeal of these jams, that you're all together under a common topic of the jam, be it a cozy game or be it everyone uses the same SRD for their game.
Hmm.
And in that process, you learn by yourself about designing a game, because it's of course you in the trenches writing your own game. But
Hmm.
as you say, you also provide community and support for other people who are in that jam. And
Yeah.
that does really sound like a great way of getting into game design, and
Hmm.
also a great way of engaging with other people who are at that same path of making their own game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I read, I can't remember who the author of this tweet was, but there was a tweet that I read ages ago that really stuck with me. There was somebody giving advice about getting into tabletop and design. And they said, seek out the people who are at the same level as you, who
Mm,
are at the same point of progress. Because a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, oh, there's that very visible community member who's way ahead in their journey and is very successful. I should go to them and try and like glom on and become friends with them and get into their circle. But really, you're better off finding the people who are in the same position as you, because there's sympathy there, you build community, you learn together, you support each other's endeavors. And yeah, those people maybe don't have a million other people trying to like be their friend. So yeah, no, I think that's another thing that jams are good for. I mean, the other thing I did that did that for me a bit was, there's an organization called the Storytelling Collective,
hmm
who do like a yearly, actually I think it might be twice yearly, adventure writing sort of course, which I did. And there's a couple of people that were on that with me that I still feel are part of my network.
Right.
So yeah, it's great.
That last part you mentioned, that's indeed also a great initiative. I did join them once for one of their adventure design. I'm not calling it courses, but like projects basically.
Hmm.
And it was very interesting to see how different people approach adventure design and how you can
Yeah.
learn from each other as well. And so I can imagine that also in a game jam that is a similar feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the game jam, especially if it's a jam with like a really solid theme that you resonate with, then you're going to get a group of people who at least you all have in common that you like that theme and were drawn to it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So by game jams and also in your own time, you start designing your own game. You mentioned earlier also something which I quickly want to just go back to, because when we started talking about you designing your own game, you also mentioned that the moment you start running games is also when you start designing for your games. And I think that's an interesting point to make there, because you mentioned it as that the moment that you start running a game, you start adjusting things for your table, and not just adjusting the world, but maybe educate rules in a different way as well, or
Hmm.
make come up with house rules and the likes. And would you say that that also is basically already doing some form of game design in that case?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the start of it, right? Because why are you making those adjustments? Are you making those adjustments because you think it would just be cool if something worked this way? That's game design. Are you making
Hmm.
adjustments because the published material is written without any knowledge of the backstory of your player characters, and you want the world to be more tied in and responsive to who they are? Well, that's also design, because you're having to adapt, and it's world building as well, which is part of design. um, yeah, I think house rules definitely design, because that's mechanical.
Yeah,
It's interesting because there's so much to design. There's world building, there's setting, there's characters, and there's mechanics, which all very different. And I think different people gravitate towards different things. I think what maybe drove me forward to write my first indie game was probably the fact that I got really interested in the mechanical side of how games work, because it's systems thinking, like you know thinking of the flow of activity of, oh, if somebody came to this kind of decision making point, what would they do here and here and here, and
right.
what would they want to be able to do in this scenario, where's the fun. Yeah, that sort of thing. uh I think especially coming up with my first dungeons and things like that is definitely game design, because yeah, you want to get a little bit creative and surprise people with the way the world reacts in certain cases. So yeah.
That might also be something that I'm just making a hypothesis here, and I'm giving the chance to everyone who might be watching this to completely debunk my hypothesis I'm making here. But I do think that is also something that attracts people about running games, that you're not just being a GM for a game because you like the game that you're running, but because it also puts you into a position where you can start playing around with the game.
Hmm.
You can start to give your own touch to the setting in which the game is set. You can see how you can tweak the rules to make them like really work well with your table at there. And I think that there are indeed probably a lot of GMs who like that part of the game, and
Hmm.
um, probably also would enjoy designing a game of their own, or at least like design an expansion for a game that they like, because they already are kind of designing anyway while they're running the game.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, more people would take to game design than they realize, but yeah, I think it probably does vary how
Mm.
much people want to get into it. uh you know, I play in a Strahd campaign
Mm.
every Monday night as a player. It's my first
Right.
time actually getting to be a player in a long-term
Oh,
campaign, which
great.
is loving it. Shout out to my DM John. And I know my DM for that, he runs published stuff, I think, pretty
Right.
strictly all the time, but he definitely adapts a lot for us, for our characters and their backgrounds. So I guess I'll probably go pick his brain about how much he feels like he's game designing when he does that, and whether he feels like it's a different thing. But yeah, for me, it's always been, I'm going to tinker with this. I just am.
Right.
Like, it just comes very naturally for me to be like, oh, so once I comprehend how something works, what if I push it in this direction? What if I add this over here? What does that do? How does that change the way things work and the tone? Oh, if I change that rule, oh, wait, that's suddenly very overpowered. That
Mm.
kind of push and pull. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's like having figured out the recipe for a dish. And now you're
Yes.
like, now I'm going to see what happens if I add more cinnamon to it. And then you find out you added more cinnamon, and maybe that didn't work very well. And the
The
next,
balance isn't quite right there. Yeah.
exactly. But the next time
Yeah.
you do it, you change something else up on the recipe. And before you know it, you really start understanding why certain parts are in the recipe
Hmm.
and when you can leave them out and when you can add to them. And that's, I think, very similar to also to understanding how a TTRPG works.
Yeah, the recipe analogy is great. I think that's got legs. It's like, you're learning to cook, you follow recipes to the letter until you
Exactly.
are proficient enough to do what is in the recipe, and you know what sauteing something is and all the rest of that. And you can measure out your ingredients and you can make something reliably. And then you get a little bit like, okay, well, that's not challenging me anymore. So what if I did this slightly differently? And then you mess up a bunch of times because you want to challenge yourself and change things, but you don't know how to change things in an informed way. And then as you
Right.
go along, you get a bit more, and then you can ultimately get to the point where you understand flavor profiles and you understand that you don't want your like sweet and salty to be out of balance and things like that. So there's just, I think it's just, you reach a level and then you see the next level along and you're like, oh, maybe I'm going to wander over here and try and get to over there. So yeah, it's like constantly expanding horizons with a lot of skills, isn't it?
Exactly. I think, yeah, I think it is like cooking. I don't think every GM will be a great cook, but I think we got a metaphor going on here.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And some people just cook because they enjoy the process of cooking. They just want to follow a
exactly.
recipe, make an old
Yeah.
faithful, cook for some friends, and have a nice time. And some people want to get experimental with it.
Perfect. That is a great addition to that. That's going in my notebook. Thank
I
you
think we
for
solved
that.
it. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. We solved game masters. Um, you continue designing your games, doing game jams, but sooner or later you are just attracted to two things. It's the drama and it's the llamas. And you put them together into
You have two
one
stats,
game.
drama and llama.
The new reskin of Lasers and Feelings. No, you made it a little bit more complex.
Mhm.
You started writing and creating Drama Llamas. A game, for those who don't know, is a game wherein every character is a llama and they're all participating in a reality TV show as we know them in our world, with all the drama, with all the confessionals included, with all the stereotypes. But instead of humans, they're llamas. They have hoofs, but they can still backstab each other. They can be villains. They can be the stars of the show, and it's all in a TTRPG game. What got you to the point where you were like, I want this game about being in a reality TV show to include llamas? Where's the connection with the llamas?
Well, I mean, that was the right way round that you said that. Like, I was okay, so I have a lot of interests. I have a lot of very varied interests, and amongst them is RuPaul's Drag Race. Like, I
Oh,
am a huge RuPaul's Drag, as many people are. Like, I am not
yep,
alone in that. It's always fun to find another one. But yeah, no, absolutely. So I am obsessed. I have watched all of the RuPaul's Drag Race, at least the sort of English speaking franchises, at least
right.
twice. So I that is a format that I'm very familiar with. It's not the only reality TV I watch. There's like various other reality TV franchises that I've dipped into and enjoy. I used to enjoy British Bake Off, say, things like that. Um, so when I'm trying to think of a game to write, You know,
Hmm.
and I felt like I wanted to write a proper game for a group. I'd had some success writing solo games and things like that and adventures, but I wanted to write a true tabletop role-playing game for a group of people.
Right.
Um, so I was thinking, well, kind of the old adage, write what you know. So I was like, well, one thing I know is reality TV. I know it, and it would make a great game because you can just see it. Like in the editing of the way the shows are put together, it's practically a game anyway. And, you know, anybody who watches enough RuPaul's Drag Race knows that there is the game as it's stated, and there is the game that is being a good RuPaul's Drag Race contestant, which is a whole different thing. You know, it's not just about being good at the stated game, it's being good at the psychological game and the playing
Right.
to the cameras game. So I felt like that was rich for being turned into mechanics in lots of interesting ways. And it was a domain I knew very well. And it was one of those things where I started thinking about it and ideas started flowing. But then it makes me laugh to think about now. I was like, I want to write a one-page game, something really simple. And I started looking at something like Honey Heist, which to me is like the one-page game that, you know, is just everyone loves it. It's perfectly encapsulates everything that you need. It's really elegant and brief. And I wanted to do something like that, but I am apparently not skilled enough to do elegant and brief. So I just ended up writing more and more and more. And here we are, we have a 50-page book. But yeah, I think when I started looking at Honey Heist, I kind of thought of the phrase drama llama. And then I was like, what if they were llamas? And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought there is something to the characters in a game like this not being human, them being, you know, cartoonish, because it
Right.
kind of gives a bit of a separation. I think it's really useful in a game where part of the game is kind of being a little bit mean sometimes if people are not so tempted to play self inserts the way they can be with a lot of other games. You know, a
Right.
lot of people's first D&D character is just an, well, they're all aspects of yourself, but a lot of them are just very clearly me but with magic. And I wanted to sort of back away from that a bit and have it be a bit more obvious that you are creating a character who is not you, but who would be fun to play and is a bit of a cartoon. So yeah, I think it helps lighten the tone of the whole game. So there is a game
Right.
design reason why they're llamas, but also, you know, drama llamas, it's a good name. Also, I tweeted the idea and said, I think I literally tweeted a game about llamas competing in reality TV show competitions called Drama Llamas, and that was the tweet, and it got a bunch of likes. And I was like, okay, yeah, this might be the first game that I kickstart, because just the initial elevator pitch, people do just sort of go, oh, interesting. Um,
Right.
which to me, I was like, huh, crowdfunding, maybe I could try that. So yeah.
So there were just a lot of things that were really coming together here.
Mm-hmm.
Your love for RuPaul's Drag Race and other reality TV shows, um, your your approach of having them be llamas to also create a little bit of distance between the players and their characters. And then also just being validated on social media by that the name is snappy, that it
Hey,
works,
if
and
you're thinking of running a Kickstarter, tweeting your elevator pitch, not that bad of an idea, it turns out, because, you know, if people respond to just that kind of one-liner of what the game is, then
exactly.
you've got to start there, right? You know that, I mean, not that if they don't respond, maybe you got buried by the algorithm, but if they do respond, then that's a very good, promising early sign, because I think a lot of like getting people to engage with the Kickstarter really is that first upfront, what is the concept, you know?
That's the hook, right? I mean, if
Right.
you're telling somebody about this cool new RPG on Kickstarter, it's called Drama Llamas, and you're playing llamas in a reality show, that's a
Mm-hmm.
hook. You know, you have
Yeah.
people like, what? What? Let me check
Yeah.
this out. And they go into
Yeah.
Kickstarter and they scroll through it, and that's when they start reading and they start really learning about the
It's,
game.
yeah, it's hooky, and then you've got to have the content to back it up, which,
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
there you go. But yeah, that's where the real work comes in. But yeah, the hook came from several different sources that smashed together, gave me this hook. I put it out into the world. People went, yes. And then I was like, okay, let's actually build this thing, that then took about 9 months to do. So yeah.
Which is, I am glad that it ended up being Llamas, because it also gave us in the final rule book there's a lot of great art in there. I think it's by
Yeah.
Alvaro Torres.
Yes, Alvaro Torres. Yeah, it's
The
an artist based in Barcelona. Yeah.
the llamas in the art in the book, I would already like suggest people to just get the book, even if they just want to see funny pictures of
Yeah.
llamas doing funny things. And
He's
it just
incredible. Yeah.
it
I cannot overstate how happy I am with the art. Like,
there's
so good.
character in them, and these llamas also sell to really clearly show you what this game is about. Already on the cover of the book, the cover art for Drama Llamas, you look at that. If I would see that in a bookstore or in a game store somewhere and I would see it, I would be like, I'm checking this game out. This looks interesting, and start flipping through the pages. But you mentioned this game came together in about 9 months of writing it,
Yeah, I
and
think about 9 months. I actually haven't gone back and looked at when I did that initial tweet, but I think my suspicion is about 9 months.
9 months, yeah. And it ended up being about, yeah, indeed. I'm just checking the PDF. It's about 50 pages of rules. And you did mention that one thing that is nice about the llamas is that they create distance between the players and their characters, which can really help in a game that where things can get mean. But you also, for that, I think for that reason, and of course because it is important to include it in the rules, fairly early on in the rule book, you also discuss the idea of CATs, concept, aim, tone, and subject matter. But you also make it very clear in the section about safety tools that even in a game that has a bit of a hilarious undertone, of course, it's silly, it's fun, it is still important to also talk about these safety tools, still checking that everyone involved in the table, that the content, the jokes that you're making, that they are fun to everyone at the table. And to also keep in mind that your llamas are going to create the drama here against each other, but we all want to have fun watching that drama. We don't want to have the drama actually being between the players.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a couple of notes in there that I really felt had to be there about, yeah, make sure that you are not that you are if you're throwing out an insult as your llama character, that you're insulting the llama character.
Right.
If you're doing that, make sure you're not replicating sort of real life systems of oppression. Like, don't invent llama racism or sexism. Don't like have llamas fat shame each other. Like, just, you can be creative with how you insult somebody and keep it about who, like, they are, not about all this external stuff that might be very upsetting for somebody at the table to have to deal with. And also, I think the other note in there was, yeah, just remember that your llama wants to win the competition, because it's also a competitive game. You are in a competition. Your llama wants to win the competition, but you, the player, want to have a good time. So the recommendation is to treat the competition as like a framework for drama, but not as an individual yourself get too attached to the idea of whether your llama wins or not, because you win by telling a very silly story is the point. And honestly, I think I put all of that in there because, naturally there's a concern, because there is an aspect of these reality shows that is quite toxic and quite especially earlier on in the genre's development, there was quite a lot of exploitative kind of stuff in there. Look at something like America's Next Top Model, things that have come out about how those contestants were treated and things like that. Like, that's not something that you want to bring in. You don't want the more harmful aspects of the genre to be brought in, at least not uncritically and unsatirically. Like, you could bring them in for satire's sake. Certainly, I think if you feel that your group is good at that and that's something they're comfortable playing with. But I think it would have been very irresponsible to not call that out, that while I love reality TV, it's not unproblematic. Oh, my earrings just fell off.
That's a good point to make, because of course, as a genre, reality TV has also changed so much over
Hmm.
the past years, and fortunately in many regards also for the better. It's good indeed to point out that when it started to break out as a genre, there were certainly some very problematic elements about it.
Yeah,
And
of
we
course, there
do,
was there's still problems in some
for sure,
aspects of it, especially with the stuff that focuses more on romance and dating. You know,
yes,
with Drama Llamas, it as it stands focuses more on, you know, the genre, the area of the genre that's about skilled people doing
Mm,
their skill as a talent in a competition,
right,
and there's interpersonal interaction involved. But you know, I that's not to say that I couldn't see it being run as like a simulator of one of these romance shows, but I think the
yeah,
safety tools would apply like extra and like lay it on thick with the
absolutely,
safety in that case. Because yeah, lo and behold, those shows in real life are some of the worst culprits for this kind of
absolutely.
stuff. So yeah.
Absolutely. Talking about the competition element, because you also mentioned that your llama is in a competition in this game, and
Hmm.
the mechanics of the game make that very clear. It is a
Yeah.
every session includes a challenge. You score for that challenge. Your llama is growing on the drama meter as well, and depending on where you are, that has benefits and drawbacks for you. And we even go so far that our llamas get things like confessionals, the typical just talking to the
Hmm.
camera bit. I will admit that is probably my most favorite part. What I like about that, it takes this so recognizable and typical element of reality TV and gives it a fixed place in the rule set. Like literally
Hmm.
saying this is part of the game. You're doing this. And it also at the table gives players a little bit of nice spotlight as well. They
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
really be the ones in that moment to talk to the camera
Yeah.
and really showcase their character. And that's one thing that I noticed in the rules. Like one thing I really like, it all of these rules, they underpin the tone and theme you wanted to go for. But I also feel that these rules, especially when it comes to the challenges, designing them must have been a challenge, for lack of better words. But how did you go about designing these rules to make sure that they were good at emulating the genre you're going for, what but still be fun rules at the table as well? What were like the major challenges there?
Let's think. So there was a lot of playtesting
Mm,
with some very generous and wonderful playtesters, um, and a lot of just paying attention to points when people wanted to do things that then the rules didn't enable them to do,
right.
or points where people particularly enjoyed a thing and then moving that so it was more central. I think the drama scale was there from the first version, but the scoring and the sort of meaning of different layers of the scale, because the scale starts off as kind of like it goes humdrum in the beginning where you're like a
Hmm.
0 to 3, and then there's relatable, and then there's breakout star kind of in the middle of the scale, the concept
Exactly.
being that somebody who's created enough drama to be interesting but not so much that people think, ooh, um, is, you know, going to be a popular character. And then you get into toxic, which is where the audience starts going off you a bit. And then at the end of the scale, there's the villain edit, which was a late addition. That was something that came through playtesting, where it was like,
Oh,
there is, because playtesting this game, a lot of the better players and the people who were really committing were using the full rule set and being pretty, you know, manipulative, or, you know, using the sabotage opportunities and things like that. And it
right.
just, it was through that and watching that and knowing the genre so well that I was like, yeah, it's not actually that harmful to be a villain. Because if you're on this drama scale, if you're in the toxic category, then that like has a minus penalty to your challenge rolls and you do worse because of that. But actually in reality, reality TV in reality, villains do incredibly well until about the end of the series. Villains, you know, there have been queens on RuPaul's Drag Race, certainly, that the community of fandom have claimed have stayed in the show for the drama. The story producers have protected them from being eliminated because they're driving the conflict on the show, which I'm sure is a real thing. I mean, also initially in the playtesting, it wasn't one of the things that got ruled out in playtesting was the idea of the game being able to emulate any reality TV show. So it narrowed down to competitions, but initially I did want to be able to emulate things like Real Housewives and things like that. But what I found with doing a soap style show is that people naturally collaborated. These are tabletop players. They were naturally quite cordial and collaborative. They needed the competition element to create that sort of drive to undercut each other. So, but yeah, no, watching soap operas definitely gave me the soap reality shows definitely gave me the villain edit idea. You know, people like Christine from Selling Sunset and oh gosh, who was it from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills? There were a bunch of them. Like, it's a different woman every season was like the worst person in the world. But yeah, no, that's so compelling to watch somebody go for that cutthroat sort of character. So I wanted to reward that a little bit, but also give them mechanics that would allow them to still succeed in that game, because you want to reward people who are playing to the tone and playing to the nature of the game that you're creating. So yeah,
that is good design, that the game rewards the behavior the game wants to see. Like this, if you're in a game like D&D, you get experience points when you fight monsters because that's what the game is about. But here in Drama Llamas,
in theory, but you know, the way I'm playing D&D, it's about a lot of things. But yeah, and a lot of people, yeah.
In Drama Llamas, you then reward, of course, driving the drama in the game. And
for sure. Yeah, I think also the game it rewards multiple different styles of play, but they're all styles of play that play to a particular archetype in the reality TV genre, right? So you can try and be a person who's always trying to be at the breakout star level, who's carefully managing the public perception and the drama through, oh, I've overshot a bit, oh, I better like dial it back and go and apologize, trying to like, you know, balance out. So that is one strategy. I mean, another strategy is just go absolutely to the wall with it and just be, you know, that character, that out there person, you know?
I think that's also nicely captured in basically the archetypes of llamas that you have in the rulebook. There's like 6 different in them, and I think they capture your the general kind of characters that you see in a competitive reality TV show. I was looking at it and I saw like the puppet master in there, and just this is the kind of character on the show who's just saying one thing while doing a different thing behind the backs, and we as the audience see it in the confessionals. We see what's going on, but the rest of the cast members might not know this is going on, and already looking at that, it's a delight, and I can see how to see that into play.
Yeah, I mean, the game plays with that because there are mechanics where, say, the sabotage mechanic, there is an outcome where the sabotage succeeds and the person who's been sabotaged has no idea who did it or that somebody has sabotaged them. They just get this penalty for being sabotaged. But of course, all of the players at the table know that that person sabotaged them, but they're all in this collaborative position, sitting slightly back from the drama and being able to go, oh, my character has no idea. So they can play into the fact that their character has no idea. So it gives them this authorship sort of position rather than full immersion, which would be difficult in a game like this if you were fully immersed in your character and then you get sabotaged. I think you want a little bit of like remove and a bit like, haha, that's funny. Oh, what if my character then goes over and does this, you know?
You're basically just not as players playing your characters, you're also together the the writer's room or production room of that show,
Hmm.
and you're making collaborative decisions on
Yeah.
where do we want this drama to go.
Yeah, you're all the producers basically at
Yeah,
the same time. Yeah.
that's interesting, and I do think there was an interesting thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier when you were still playtesting the game and you were thinking about also creating it as a game for just like reality soaps, and that you realized that the people you were playing with, they were too collaborative for that
Hmm.
kind of, and they needed the competitive element to really work against each other. I found it an interesting remark that TTRPG players, how dare they? They are too collaborative with each other.
Yeah, they just don't want to be. They are hesitant to be nasty to each other without a good reason, right? Unlike people on reality TV soaps who just go
right.
straight in and seem to get insulted over nothing. It's the reverse. It's very much like, yeah, I think it's interesting, like playtesting, even the competition version,
Mhm.
people always start like they're sizing each other up. Usually it starts that somebody does a sabotage because it's an easy role to do, and it's
Right.
kind of, it's understood, it doesn't feel excessively personal. So that starts, and if that succeeds, then it starts to be like, that always seems to be, for some reason, the one that people gravitate towards is easy to understand, easy to execute, and then from there things start to open up. Usually it's interesting to see that happen with different groups.
Is there, next to finding out during the playtest that using this game for just regular reality soaps wasn't suitable, are there any other rules that you tested but that ended up on the cutting floor?
Oh, loads. And rules that are still in there that worked completely differently, like the deep dark secrets mechanic, which in the game as it's published is powerful. That's a move that I think a lot of people don't initially pick up on, and it's kind of thrown in there for players who really go deep on the rules and like for really understand the system. But the deep dark secrets mechanic as published allows you to erase a previous successful roll by yourself or another player. So if a player rolls successfully for drama and manages to make themselves a breakout star, you can reveal a deep dark secret and undo their roll. That has been through so many different iterations. Like I knew that I wanted to have like a secret reveal kind of opportunity. One of those moments, like record scratch moments where somebody goes, well, I've been cheating this entire time. And everybody's like, oh,
Mm.
like that. People, when that sort of was first introduced, people were like, oh, we love this. We want more of this. We want more of this, like reveal moments.
Right.
Um, I think that had to be played around with a lot though, because I think initially the idea was you would have these secrets and you would tell the GM what they were. So they would be secrets between the player and the GM, and the player
Mm.
would decide when to reveal them, or the GM also had the power to reveal them initially. People had trouble coming up with secrets, and people occasionally, there were one or two playtests where people came up with secrets that were not were a bit difficult on tone and lent into some of the more historically exploitative stuff. There was,
Uh,
some stuff around there that I'm gonna reel, and it's just like, no, 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 we're
yeah.
not playing with that sort of thing. So that's when now this iteration of secrets, there are prompts for the secrets. There are 10 different ones that you can use that are guidance to players for how to use this mechanic in a safe way. So yeah, there was a lot of evolution of that's still there. I'm trying to think if there's anything that was there that is now gone. I mean, loads. The drama roles were initially, being from a heavy sort of D&D background, the central roles, resolution roles of the game were very like, roll to see if you hit and then roll to see how much drama you add.
Yeah.
Before one of my kind playtesters was like, I'm rolling to get a roll, and I was like, yeah, that's silly. Let's get rid of that. So yeah, there was a lot of evolution of mechanics, like playtesting, invaluable. Like it just can't sing its praises enough. And I know that everyone knows this, that you should playtest a game, but the how rewarding it was to do, and to watch things work and get that really, really valuable, useful feedback that helps you evolve something. Like, I think, yeah, I loved that feedback, even when it was like, this didn't quite work, because it was so like, yeah, I feel that. I felt that in the session that it wasn't quite working. And you've articulated it in a way that inspires me to try this whole different thing. And it's just opened up this whole other avenue. It's
And
so collaborative in such like a rewarding way.
and what was your approach with the playtesting? Did you, when you went to playtest, did you basically write a first draft of the rules, then
Mhm.
playtested those, or was there also focused playtesting for specific elements in the rules?
No, it was full sessions every time. I mean, I'm a small creator, so it's not. I know it's not really best practice for the author of the game to be the GM in the playtests, but there we go.
Mm.
I think a lot of us are in that position where we don't really have that easy network to draw on of other people to playtest our stuff. But I found it really useful, and yeah, I ran, you know, yeah, a bunch of actual sessions. I have one very good friend, hey Jenny, if you see this, who was in so many of the playtests that eventually she had to tap out and be like, I've played this game so many times that I cannot remember which rule is which anymore. She was starting to be like, but that's how that works. And I'm like, no, previous version. So
Mm.
yeah, no, I wouldn't focus playtest on particular rules. I would play full sessions. I would at most at the start of a session sort of say, this is a new archetype that I'm playing around with. It would be great if somebody would take that and play that. This is a new mechanic that I've added. It would be great if you would consider paying extra attention to that and finding excuses to use that, like a little bit of pre-game guidance to my lovely playtest players, to be like, this in particular is something that I'm interested to see how it falls out in play. And they would usually be pretty obliging with that and pretty creative. So yeah.
So it also helps if you also have good play testers who help you along with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Find people who are good communicators and have played a lot of games. Like, yeah.
Awesome. Yvris, we are slowly drawing to an end of our conversation about the dramas, the llamas, and everything in between. But every time I do have a guest on this conversation, I like to ask them a hypothetical question, which might be completely unrelated to what we're talking about. This one is not completely unrelated. Imagine, hypothetically, once this conversation is over, you walk out of your room and the doorbell rings, and there is a nice person in front of the door who tells you that they have a lot of money and they can send you anywhere in the world on a beautiful, all expenses paid vacation with as many people as you want, under the one condition that you take a llama with you. And the llama has to be with you during the entire vacation. Where would you go with your llama?
Where would I go with my llama? Wow. Well, um, immediately my brain goes to, where is a llama going to be comfortable? Which is like classic. I'm like, what? Not where do I want to go? Like, what's going to make the llama happy? Like,
Oh,
let's see. I think it would have to be somewhere with like really stunning natural views and a lot of grass, and would pick somewhere that I haven't been before. Um, Probably like the Swiss Alps or something. I've never been there,
oh,
but I have seen pictures and they look incredible, stunning. Um, or the Italian lakes, somewhere like that, somewhere that has a lot of greenery, a lot of scenery, a lot of space for the llama to roam, and a lot of space for, me and whoever I take with me to be in a villa and eat good food and relax and play games. That sounds like the ideal situation for everybody involved there.
for everybody involved. I can already see the postcards with the beautiful Swiss Alps in the background and a very happy llama in front of it,
Just chewing
uh,
away. Nom, nom,
just chewing
nom.
away on that delicious Swiss Alp grass. Great answer. Ivris, thank you very much for the conversation.
No, thank
Um,
you.
before we alpaca things up here, could you would you like to share where people can find you and your games?
Sure. Easiest thing is to go to buttonkin.com, which is my website, which has links to my Substack newsletter that I release once a month. New newsletter is out tomorrow, in fact. And all of my socials are linked from there as well. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. I don't tweet a lot because I'm terrible at self-promotion, and also I find Twitter hard, but I am on there kind of lurking, looking at other people's tweets. But yeah, buttonkin.com is the easiest. That's my website. That's where everything congregates. So yeah.
Awesome. Great. So definitely go check that out. Check out Yvris games and content. Once again, thank you very much for coming on here today for this conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
I had a lovely time. Yeah.
That's great to hear. Those for people who watch this, thank you very much for watching this. I hope you learned a lot about the drama and the llamas here today. And we'll be back here on the channel already on Tuesday for our regular Tuesday 5e D&D game of the Convergence Manifesto. Until then, everyone, stay safe, take care, and see you soon on Horde of Tales. Bye!
Bye.